What is a trigger really? Not,
oh my god, I'm so triggered.
in short, a trigger is an event that leads to another event. For example, let's say you have a gun. Our guns have a trigger, and when you hold the gun like this, nothing is happening until you pull the trigger. That is the exact same thing our brain does. Due to our life experiences, in this case, due to the fact that we were in abusive relationships, our brain always has the gun in hand ready to go off at any moment. There are some cases where you don't really put the finger on the trigger, and heck, sometimes it even puts the gun down. It may be out of reach because it's not that big of a trigger. There may be other triggers where you're shaking and your fingers right on the trigger and you don't really know what's going to happen, and one little small tiny thing will cause you to snap, pull that trigger, and you're off. So for example, as someone who was in multiple physically abusive relationships, I learned that a lot of yelling or threats or like raising your hand is going to lead to a negative event. So if someone's yelling at me, my brain is automatically going to go into this place of, okay, what can I do to make this as easy as possible for me to survive through? In some cases, for example, when you're really mentally exhausted, a trigger like yelling that may not be that big of a deal and maybe you're just chilling. Other times it pushes you to the point where it doesn't take much and all of a sudden you're off. And triggers can range from don't really impact your life to majorly impacting your life. When I just got out of the abusive relationship, yelling was a really, really big thing for me, which is really difficult because my family is very, very, very loud and they yell a lot. So when there was a small amount of yelling, my finger was already almost on the trigger, so I was always going off, I was flinching. Sometimes I would have an outward expression, an outward response to the trigger. Sometimes I would have like an implode where I would just be taken over by anxiety and an imploding panic attack where I would just go be by myself and my brain would spiral. These triggers can look a lot of different ways for different people. Just because two people were in abusive relationships, even if they were in relationships that were very similar, their brain acclimates to things differently. So just because you have a trigger or just because I have a trigger doesn't mean that Susie and Jennifer and Karen all have the exact same triggers. It's pretty stereotypical to see people who, when someone raises a hand, that someone flinches. And someone flinches because they are triggered to believe that they're about to get hit. Raising their hand is the event that pulls a trigger, and the triggered response is the fact that they flinched. But unfortunately, there is not enough talk and normalization around triggers and how they can affect your life. And another unfortunate fact is that so many of us are living our lives constantly triggered or being triggered by things, and we don't even know that it's a triggered response. So that's why it's really important to me that we begin to open up this conversation and have it in a non-judgmental space and allow ourselves to just talk about it. Because considering that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 5 men, and considering those numbers are highly underreported, I believe it's closer to 1 in 2 and 1 in 3 respectively, are victims of abuse, a majority of us are walking around being constantly triggered by things we've gone through. And I would argue that a majority of us don't even know that they're triggered responses. Let's open the conversation. Let's begin to talk about triggers and how they impact our lives.